Hi, my name's Jimmy Sims. I'm a bass player. I've played with artists like Bryan Ferry, Dido, Macdonald, The Saturdays, and I'm currently on tour with Ezra. I'm here with the Music for All charity to give you my top tips for learning the bass guitar. So I picked up the bass guitar when I was about 14 years old, but it wasn't my first instrument. I started learning piano when I was 6 and started learning trumpet when I was about 9. I was lucky enough to grow up in the West Midlands, where the West Midlands Music Service had a lending library of instruments, so you could try out different things if you wanted to. So through my school I think I tried out saxophone, violin, trumpet as I say, and a bunch of other stuff before I found a bass guitar in a friend's house and just picked it up and started playing, and it just felt right to me. These lovely big warm notes. It's quite a physical feeling playing bass guitar. I love the bass guitar because for me it's the basis of most pop music and most songs. The bass is gonna play pretty much from the start to the finish of any song. We are the foundation, we are the bottom layer of the cake that everybody's going to want to eat. Anything on the top is just icing. So if you want to learn or are learning the bass guitar, here are my top tips to get you started. So my first tip perhaps doesn't sound too important, but it was very important to me. And as you can probably tell by my beautiful purple bass, I care what my instrument looks like. I always think if I've bought an instrument that I don't like the look of, I'm not going to want to go and pick it up. I'm not going to want to play it. And essentially putting the hours in is the best way to get better. So for me, my first tip would be pick an instrument that you like the look of and that you're comfortable playing. I remember my first bass was a Westone Concord Bass 1, and it was a beautiful black bass with a giant white scratch plate and a beautiful maple neck, similar to this one. And I remember being so excited about it that I think I even had it in my bed with me on Christmas night because I was that excited about playing it. So I was inseparable from the instrument because I loved the way it looked, I loved the way it made me feel. As a 14-year-old, it was very exciting. So I think pick something that you like the look of, that you're going to be ready to go and play at any moment. So my next tip would be to make sure your instrument is professionally set up. And by that, what I mean is make sure it's comfortable to play. You can take it down to your local guitar shop. They'll most likely have a technician that can take a look at your bass for you. You want to get the action adjusted so that the height of the strings is comfortably close to the fretboard. Not too close because you start getting buzzing and things like that, but if you have your strings set up too far off the fretboard, it's going to be uncomfortable to play. So you can get the bridge moved up and down and the neck bowed in or bowed out to get it as comfortable for you as possible. And there's no one way of getting that done. Some people like a super low action, by which I mean super close strings to the fretboard. Some people like a really high action, and you can experiment with that yourself. But it's important to get it professionally set up so that it's the most comfortable it can be for you. Because although they are just our hands, we can still get injuries from playing instruments that are poorly set up. Also, you need the intonation looking at. So this, again, the bridge, you can move these saddles forwards or backwards, and that will make sure that the bass is not only in tune down the bottom, but also in tune once you reach the dusty end, doing those sweet bass solos that I know you're going to be doing. So yeah, that's my next tip. My next tip is to learn to tune your instrument. So we all know that there are tuners available for purchase at your local guitar shop or on the internet, which you can plug in, or some have a little microphone on, or some will clip to your headstock, and the vibrations will inform it where your tuning's at. But it's important to also know how to tune just on your own. Say you're there without a tuner and you're just trying to practice yourself. Now the strings, as we know, are E, A, D and G on a 4-string bass. There are 5 steps, 5 semitones, 5 half steps I suppose, in between each string. So if you count up to your 5th fret, so you've got open, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That 5th fret should be the same pitch as the next open string. Should we check it? It is. Luckily I'm in tune. And then the same on the next string up. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the same again next way up. So you can be in tune with yourself at least. There are other ways of doing that. You can do it using harmonics on the 5th fret there and on the 7th fret on the next string, and you should get the same note. There's also press the 7th fret on the string above, and that should be the octave higher but the same note as the string below. So electronic tuners are fantastic. They're a wonderful tool, but we don't always have them with us, and it's really good to be able to tune using your ear and practice tuning. Knock yourself out of tune. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, get up to the 5th fret. And we can hear that straight back in tune. Ready to play. Okay, so my next tip is correct basic techniques. The easiest way, the simplest way, probably the most traditional way of playing a bass guitar is find one of your pickups. This bass has 2 pickups. Some basses have 1. Get your thumb, rest it nice and easy on top of one of the pickups, whichever one's more comfortable, and then use these 2 fingers to just pluck the string. Now remember, you're not plucking in and you're not pulling out, you're plucking up against the string, and just get some nice solid notes. I didn't get one there, did I? So that's your right hand technique, very basic. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then with your left hand, when you first start playing, the easiest, most comfortable place for you to be is get that thumb and hide it from everybody behind that neck. So then your fingers are sat nicely on top of the fretboard and you can reach everything. If you've got your thumb over the top, luckily this is a small necked bass and I've got longish fingers, I can still reach things, but you're kind of, you're stuck a little bit. You can't move up and down quite so easily. With just the thumb on there, you're free to move your left hand up and down the neck. And then simply, to fret a note, you want to get not on the fret, but just behind the fret. Not too far behind the fret, because you end up with sort of buzzing and dead notes. If you just fret firmly, but not too hard, just behind the fret, pluck, you'll get a nice, solid note. Now, people do talk about the idea of playing finger per fret. So, say you're starting on the 1st fret here, use your 1st finger. 2nd fret, use your 2nd finger. 3rd, 4th. But this can be quite a stretch when you're first starting. So when you're first starting, I'd say perhaps even think about keeping it to 1, and then use these 2 for the 2nd, and then don't forget about your little friend, your 4th finger, on the 3rd fret. So, which is actually double bass technique. They use the middle 2 fingers together instead of one at a time. So that's the basic plucking technique. And then you've also got, some bass players use a pick, something similar to this. Small, mine is a nylon flat pick. And you can either use one finger and a thumb like that, or the Van Halen technique, which is 2 fingers and a thumb. Personally, I like the 1 finger and a thumb, and you're just striking down, and quite gently. You'll notice I'm just using my thumb and my finger to move. I'm not using my whole arm, because you lose a little bit of control with that. But you notice the instrument sounds a little bit harder at the front end of the note. You get a bit more of a tack rather than that, slightly softer. So perhaps better for rock playing. Another technique that you may know about is slap bass. That's basically taking the thumb, hitting just around the end of the fingerboard and getting that sort of, but there's 2 parts to this. So you've got the originally when it was invented by Larry Graham, he called it thumping and plucking. So you've got thumping, which is super percussive. You get, again, a lot more attack. And then you've got the plucking. So you take your curved index finger, or maybe even your middle finger, and pull the string away from the fretboard and let it hit back. So you end up with this sort of sound. And you can get some really nice percussive attack. You can use complex rhythms with that. It can be quite an advanced technique, but even just putting the odd little plucked note in a bass line can make all the difference to your groove. My next tip is about when to stay silent and how to stay silent. With a bass, we are the bridge in between the rhythm section, so the drums and percussion, and the harmony and melody section, so any pianos, guitars, any harmony instruments. So we've got to make sure that we're concentrating on rhythm. Now, if you're playing a really simple bass line, say 1-5, so I'll take an F and a C. That if I just let the notes ring, then we don't get much rhythm going on, whereas if I mute, suddenly there's a bit more of a groove to it. Now you can probably see what I'm doing here is muting with the right hand. So if you were to play an open string with the right hand, you can then use it, just gently tap on to stop the string vibrating. Now, what you can also hear is these other 2 strings doing a sympathetic vibration and sounding out after my note. So that's where my left hand comes into play, and I use that to stop the other strings. Just gently rested on top of the strings there. So again, if I wasn't to stop those notes at all, we'd end up with, which is not what we want. We want something with a little bit of a groove to it. So if I use a combination of this hand muting and my left hand muting, get a very simple, quite country bass line. My next tip would be, don't just think like a bass player. So bass players, because of the physicality of the instrument, how it's tuned, and where it is in the register, so quite low, they'll think in certain ways, in certain, usually fairly simple ways for pop and rock music. If you want to expand as a musician, maybe you could think about learning melodies. So if you get bass guitar lessons from a bass guitar player, you could get some melody lessons from another instrument, maybe a saxophone, electric guitar, maybe violin. somebody that teaches those sorts of things. If you want to learn about harmony, i.e. how notes interact with each other when they're played at the same time, you could think about getting lessons from somebody who plays an instrument that deals with that a lot, maybe piano, maybe guitar. So it's not just thinking as a bass player, think as a rounded musician. What else can you learn from other musicians? And don't necessarily, when you're learning a song, always play the bass line. Try learning the melody. Try and see if you can pick out some little bits of melody. One of the earliest melody exercises I learnt was The Sun Has Got His Hat On. Which is a nice little warm-up exercise, actually, and fun to play at parties. But it's good to know the melody as well as the bass line, and it's good to know what harmony you're dealing with, so you can do different things with your bass line. My next tip would be to learn some scales. Anybody that has studied music feels that scales is a dreaded word because it can mean boring up and down the same pattern. But there are ways of keeping it interesting. It's important to learn. Probably the easiest scale is to recognise is the simple major scale. So I'm going to play G major. But it's also important to learn different ways of doing the same thing. So you can play a G major scale here. You can also play it like this. Or you can start using some open strings. And just think about, there's not always one way of doing things. There's multiple different ways of doing them. It'll keep your fingers supple and ready to play, and can get your mind thinking about different ways of playing songs, different ways of improvising, and just keep music a little bit more interesting. So my next tip is to really explore the instrument yourself, physically explore your instrument. With my one, I've got 2 pickups here, which I can make different sounds with. So I can go to the front pickup and get, and then I can take it to both pickups, here and here, and get quite a nice sort of well-rounded bass sound, or just flick to the very back pickup and it's again a little bit more nasal, a little bit more middly. If you've got an instrument that's just got 1 pickup, or whatever your instrument is, you can make different noises just by how you physically play. So I tend to play with my thumb, as we spoke about, resting on a pickup, but if we move all the way back here, we can get different sounds just depending on where you pluck the instrument. A friend of mine, Lee Sklar, is a bass player who has a little switch on his bass that does absolutely nothing. And he calls it his producer switch. If somebody comes to him and says, I want that to sound a little bit different, can you do something and make it sound a bit different? He flicks the switch to pretend he's done something and then just simply moves his hand. So it's a great way of getting lots of different sounds out of your instrument, and you can even make some up for yourself. I found through looking at guitar players who did a lot of palm muting. By palm muting I mean taking the palm of your hand and resting it gently just in front of the bridge. You can get some really nice, quite heavy attack, but then quite soft decay notes. And it leaves my other fingers free to do some other stuff up the top. There's also ways that you can do that using a pick. And it's a very satisfying noise to be making. So explore the instrument, see what you can do with your bass. Okay, so my next tip would be to steal things, by which I mean whenever you're watching another bass player play, see if you can see something that they're doing that you've not tried, that you can then put into your own playing. I don't mean literally steal things, that would be against the law. So a good example of this is, for me, is playing in octaves, which I learned. There was a bass player in Peter Gabriel's band called Tony Levin, who played a few bass lines on a fretless bass where he would use octaves to really fatten up the sound and give it a slight sort of chorusing effect. So I stole it from him. I put it in a George Ezra song called Anyone for You, which goes... So just stealing that octave just pushes the bass to the front of the mix, makes it stand out a little bit, and gives it a bit more of a unique sound. So that's my example of having stolen something. Go out and look at some other bass players and see what you can steal from them. My next tip is don't just practice sitting down. When you sat down, your bass is on your leg, slightly off to one side, and because it's quite high up, your arm can be a little bit over, a little bit like the claw. And when you're standing up at a show, it moves and it's in a completely different position. So it can be like playing a completely new instrument. It's useful to practice standing up so that you know what you're going to be feeling like and how the instrument's going to be feeling when you're actually performing. My other tip to do with this would be practice moving around a little bit. So even if you're not dancing, just not standing frozen on the spot is much better when you're actually performing to somebody. So just practice just staying relaxed and practice standing up, because that's how you want to be when you're playing on stage. My next tip would be listening, and listening when it comes to playing with other people. When you find yourself playing with a band, as we've mentioned before, the bass is the bridge in between the rhythm section, so the drummer or percussion player, and the harmony and melody section, so pianos, guitars, singers. It's fairly self-explanatory that with the melody section, if they're playing a certain note or a certain chord, you want to be playing something sympathetic. So if they're playing a G, you don't want to be playing a G flat. Otherwise you end up with that sort of sound. So listening to them, knowing what's going on, but also with the drummer and with a percussion player, you want to be playing on the same beats, on the same sort of rhythm, or playing with the same rhythm that they're playing. Typically, as a pop bass player, I tend to listen out for the kick drum and know that that's where I want my basic notes to play. So say the kick drum is on 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to stick that rhythm and then keep it make sure that I'm always playing that rhythm and fitting anything else that I want to do around that basic rhythm. So listen to your other musicians, know what part of the instrument that you need to be listening out for, so say the kick drum with drummers, or the root notes when it comes to melody and harmony players. So my next tip would be to remember that music is not a competition. There's always going to be somebody who is better than you. And the important thing is not to try and beat people, not to try and get yourself better so that you can show off and blow people away. The important thing is that you're playing to enjoy it. That's the main thing. I play bass for a living, but that doesn't mean that I'm the best bass player in the world. Absolutely not. But what I enjoy about the instrument is being able to bring happiness and joy to other people, and also I find it hugely contenting for myself. So if I start doing what I call compare and despair, looking at other bass players thinking, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that, then that for me is when I start losing. Music is not a competition, it's just out there to be enjoyed.